A wealthy heiress gets stranded in a small town due to car trouble while driving to a secluded resort for a private Thanksgiving getaway. What happens next? Before we dive into the story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. Stay tuned until the end, things are about to get intense. Now, let's get into it. Isabella Kensington had always been the golden girl of New York's elite, the kind of woman whose name opened doors and inspired whispers at charity galas. Born into the Kensington legacy, one of the wealthiest and most influential families in the city, she was raised with every imaginable privilege. Expensive tutors, private ballet lessons, and summers in the south of France were staples of her upbringing. The Kensington Empire spanned industries from luxury hotels to high-end fashion lines, ensuring that Isabella never knew a day of financial worry. But along with that wealth came the expectations that shadowed her every step. Despite her privileged life, Isabella was fiercely independent, a trait that both fascinated and frustrated her social circle. She was known for her sharp intellect and business acumen, which set her apart from the other socialites who mostly graced magazine covers for their latest shopping spree. Isabella had carved out a niche for herself as a strategic consultant within her family's conglomerate, overseeing ventures that required a mix of innovation and diplomacy. Yet even as she attended board meetings in sleek designer suits and wielded her power with poise, there was an air of restlessness that clung to her like a well-kept secret. Luxury was not just part of Isabella's life, it was a language she spoke fluently. Her Manhattan penthouse boasted floor-to-ceiling windows with a breathtaking view of Central Park, and the decor was a curated blend of vintage Parisian pieces and modern art. Her wardrobe was a testament to her status, timeless couture gowns, tailored blazers, and an impressive collection of heels that rivaled most high-end boutiques. Social media followers adored her, influencers mimicked her style, and glossy magazines touted her as the epitome of modern elegance. But while the world marveled at her picture-perfect life, Isabella felt an unsettling emptiness that not even her most extravagant parties could fill. Despite her reputation for poise, there was a guarded side to Isabella that few ever saw. Her life had been touched by loss when her mother passed away during her teenage years, leaving her father to manage both the company and his grief. Though Isabella remained outwardly composed, the loss instilled in her a deep fear of vulnerability. This fear fueled her relentless drive and perfectionism, propelling her forward even when she yearned for the chance to pause. It was this duality, part ice queen, part restless soul, that made her both admired and misunderstood. Still, Thanksgiving was a predictable affair in Isabella's world, a dazzling event attended by tycoons and celebrities, complete with crystal chandeliers and lavish floral centerpieces flown in from Italy. For years, she hosted gatherings where gratitude was another word for expensive gifts exchanged between friends who wore smiles as polished as their designer watches. But this year, she was drained by the endless charade. The idea of one more photo op, one more round of hollow toasts, left her feeling exhausted. As the holiday approached, Isabella found herself craving something different. The past few months had been grueling, business negotiations, social obligations, and a whirlwind schedule had left her depleted. She scrolled through invitations that promised grandeur and luxury, but none of them sparked even a flicker of interest. One evening, as she absent-mindedly flipped through her planner, a note scribbled in her assistant's handwriting caught her eye: Quiet Mountain Resort, Thanksgiving Special. The idea was so far removed from her usual scene that she laughed out loud. But the more she thought about it, the more appealing it seemed, a chance to be somewhere quiet, where the world didn't know her name. Isabella decided she'd spend Thanksgiving at the resort, away from the watchful eyes and whispered gossip of Manhattan's elite. The idea was impulsive, almost rebellious, and that only made it more appealing. She informed her assistant, Dana, who tried to mask her surprise. "Would you like the security detail and chauffeur to accompany you, ma'am?" Dana asked, ever the efficient organizer. But Isabella's brow furrowed. The whole point was to escape, not to replicate her life in miniature. She wanted solitude, independence. To everyone's shock, including her own, she said, "No, I'll drive myself." The decision felt exhilarating and slightly absurd. The last time she'd driven herself anywhere longer than a few city blocks was years ago, and that had been in the controlled chaos of Manhattan traffic. Yet the thought of being on the open road, away from the scrutiny and spectacle of her usual world, was tempting. She selected her sleek black sports car, known more for being a statement piece than for practical travel, but perfect for what she envisioned, a journey on her own terms. The morning she was set to leave, Dana hovered in the background, suggesting playlists and preparing a list of emergency contacts. But Isabella waved her off, a confident smile playing on her lips. She stepped into her car, the leather seat cool beneath her as she adjusted her sunglasses and took a deep breath. The city's skyline glistened in her rearview mirror as she started the engine, a symbol of everything she was leaving behind, even if only for a little while. Isabella's black sports car glided smoothly down the country road, surrounded by an ocean of tall, whispering trees and the vivid hues of late autumn leaves. The road was narrower than she expected, flanked by foliage so dense that only slices of the dusky sky peeked through. She hadn't passed another car in nearly an hour, and a creeping unease settled in her stomach. Glancing at the dashboard, she frowned as the engine light blinked to life, followed by a jolt and an unsettling sputter. The car shuddered, then fell silent, coasting to a stop as the last trace of daylight slipped behind the hills. She sighed, tapping the screen of her phone, but it stubbornly displayed no service. The quiet around her was absolute, the kind of silence that felt more suffocating than serene. Isabella was used to bustling streets, the hum of conversations, the clinking of glasses, anything but this eerie stillness. Stepping out, she shivered as a cool breeze wrapped around her, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and pine. It was then she realized just how far she was from her world of city lights and gleaming skyscrapers. Minutes ticked by, and just as she contemplated the absurdity of hiking in her designer boots, a rumble reached her ears. Headlights pierced the twilight as an old pickup truck came into view. Relief flooded her chest, quickly followed by a hint of embarrassment. The truck slowed, and a man stepped out, his rugged flannel and worn jeans a stark contrast to Isabella's tailored ensemble. "Evening," he greeted, a hint of curiosity in his eyes as he took in her sleek outfit and polished hair. He looked about mid-30s, with a sturdy build and kind eyes that suggested patience. "Car trouble?" Isabella straightened her posture, masking her nerves with a practiced, composed nod. "Yes, it just stopped." "I don't have any signal," she said, frustration cracking through her polished exterior. The man nodded, his expression softening. "Name's Sam. I run the repair shop in Hopewell, just a few miles down the road," he said, popping the hood with a practiced hand. After a few minutes of assessing wires and engine parts, he wiped his hands on a rag from his back pocket. "It's your alternator. Not something I can fix right here, and it's too late to tow it to the shop tonight." The news settled on Isabella like a weight. Her mind raced through options, none of them practical. Before she could muster a response, Sam continued, "Listen, it's getting dark, and there's nowhere nearby you can stay tonight. Why don't you come back with me? My wife, Maggie, wouldn't have it any other way." Isabella's instinct was to refuse, to maintain control of the situation. But the shadows deepened, and a chill settled into her bones, more from the unknown than the crisp air. The warmth in Sam's voice felt genuine, an echo of something she hadn't felt in years. "If it's not too much trouble," she finally said, the hesitation in her voice betraying her usual confidence. Sam's smile was slight but reassuring as he opened the passenger door of the truck. "Not at all. Hop in." The ride to Hopewell was illuminated by the soft glow of dashboard lights and the occasional street lamp casting brief halos on the road. Sam drove with a steady hand, navigating curves with an ease born of familiarity. The town appeared as they rounded a bend, cozy and quaint, as if pulled from the pages of a storybook. Warm porch lights glowed, and the scent of wood smoke hinted at fireplaces crackling in living rooms. They turned onto a narrow street lined with modest houses, and Sam pulled into the driveway of one that was painted a cheerful blue with a chipped white picket fence. The porch was lit by a string of golden lights, and a pair of children's bicycles leaned against the side. The front door opened before Sam could announce their arrival, revealing Maggie, a woman whose smile seemed to light up the space around her. She had a flour-dusted apron tied around her waist and hair pulled into a loose bun. "Is this your mystery guest?" she asked, eyes twinkling as they landed on Isabella. "This is Isabella," Sam confirmed. "Her car broke down, so she'll be staying with us tonight." Maggie's expression didn't flicker with the surprise Isabella expected. Instead, she nodded warmly, stepping aside and motioning for her to come in. "Well, any friend of Sam's is welcome here," she said, waving a hand that was already gesturing toward the cozy living room. The room was a snapshot of comfort, filled with the scent of cinnamon and baked bread. Worn couches with handmade quilts invited guests to sink in, and children's toys were scattered in a way that spoke of a home lived in and loved. Isabella hesitated at the threshold, the unfamiliarity of it all stirring something raw in her. This was no opulent suite or curated penthouse, it was life, simple and unpolished. A young girl, maybe 16, peeked around the corner. "Hi, I'm Lily," she said with a smile that mirrored her mother's. A little boy, no more than 5, bounded in next, curiosity radiating from his wide eyes. "Who are you?" he asked with unfiltered enthusiasm. Maggie laughed, touching the boy's shoulder lightly. "Ethan, this is Isabella. She'll be our guest tonight." "Guest?" Ethan repeated, eyes brightening. "Does that mean we have to share dessert?" "Only if you're nice," Maggie teased, ushering them all toward the kitchen, where the air was warm and filled with the sound of an old radio playing a soft tune. Isabella felt a small smile pull at her lips as she followed, though her heart thudded with an unfamiliar rhythm. She was surrounded by strangers, in a town she'd never heard of, on a night that should have unfolded with luxury and predictability. Yet here she was, about to sit down for an impromptu meal that was more than a world away from her usual Thanksgiving plans. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't know what would happen next. The warmth of the kitchen enveloped Isabella, a stark contrast to the sleek chill of her penthouse, where the air always carried the faint scent of polished marble and lavender-scented diffusers. Here, the air smelled like fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and a hint of something sweet. Every corner of the space seemed to tell a story: family photos tacked to the fridge, a calendar with scribbled reminders, and Lily's school art project, a paper turkey with lopsided feathers, displayed proudly near the window. Isabella shifted uneasily, the clack of her heels on the worn wooden floor sounding out of place. Maggie noticed and glanced down with a smile. "I bet you could use some slippers. Those look like they could put up a fight," she joked, pointing at Isabella's pointed-toe stilettos. Isabella blinked, momentarily stunned by the ease with which Maggie spoke to her. Back in Manhattan, any conversation with someone like Isabella came steeped in careful words and curated charm. But Maggie's voice was light, unpretentious. Before Isabella could respond, Lily appeared, holding a pair of fuzzy slippers with little sheep faces on them. "Here, you can borrow mine," Lily offered. The gesture was simple, but struck Isabella as oddly intimate. She looked into the girl's eyes, warm and earnest, and took the slippers with a nod of thanks. Dinner was served on mismatched plates, and Isabella found herself seated between Ethan, who jabbered excitedly about dinosaurs, and Sam, who filled the silence with easy conversation. Maggie ladled out stew, and the rich, savory aroma made Isabella realize she hadn't eaten since that morning. Ethan dug in with gusto, his laughter filling the room as Sam pretended to steal a piece of his bread, sparking a playful protest. The scene was a far cry from her usual dinners, where delicate courses were paired with fine wines, and conversations danced around politics and stock markets. Here, the dialogue had no pretense, it was open and unpolished, ranging from Lily's upcoming math test to a community bake sale Maggie was organizing. "So, Isabella," Sam said, breaking her reverie. "What do you do back in the city?" She hesitated, the question feeling almost invasive in its simplicity. Back home, her name alone was enough to answer it. "I work for my family's company. We manage a lot of investments and luxury developments," she said, choosing her words carefully. Maggie nodded, her expression genuinely interested, not judgmental or distant. "That must keep you busy," she said, passing a plate of warm bread down the table. "It does," Isabella said, reaching for a slice and noting how the edges were just a little crispy, the center soft and buttery. The simple comfort of it caught her off guard. She glanced at Lily, who was now talking about her volunteer project at the library. The young girl's enthusiasm was contagious, her words tumbling out as she described reading programs for younger kids. Isabella felt a tug at her heart, a mix of nostalgia and something deeper that she couldn't quite name. As the meal went on, Isabella's initial discomfort softened, replaced by a hesitant curiosity. The clinking of forks, Ethan's giggles, and Maggie's occasional interjections created a soundtrack so foreign to Isabella's usual dinner ambience that it was almost disorienting. Her meals were often punctuated by careful, scripted conversations, each comment weighed for its impact. Here, the conversation meandered freely, and no one seemed to mind when it drifted into playful bickering or bursts of laughter. Ethan leaned over, eyes wide. "Do you have a pet?" he asked, smearing his mashed potatoes as he spoke. Isabella opened her mouth, a polished no on the tip of her tongue, but she paused. She could see that Ethan's question was not an idle one, he was waiting for an answer that might tell him something about her. "I don't," she said finally, her voice softer than before. "I always thought about getting a dog, but never did." Ethan's face lit up. "You should. We have a dog named Rusty. He's old but really fun. He's probably sleeping on the couch now." Maggie chuckled at that, shaking her head. "If you're lucky, he'll share it with you." Isabella managed a small laugh, the corners of her mouth curving in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. The conversation shifted back to town events, and she found herself listening intently as Maggie recounted stories about the Thanksgiving potluck and how the entire community chipped in to make it special. "So, Isabella, what does Thanksgiving look like back in the city?" Lily asked, eyes sparkling with innocent curiosity. Isabella hesitated again, feeling the weight of the question. How could she explain that her Thanksgiving was a staged performance, complete with catered dishes and a guest list vetted for its networking potential? "It's different," she said after a beat. "A lot more people, I guess. But I think I like this better," she added, surprising herself as much as everyone else. The honesty in her voice was startling. Maggie reached over to pat her arm lightly. "Well, you're welcome to share ours as long as you need." A strange warmth spread through Isabella's chest, one that had nothing to do with the heat from the stove or the laughter echoing in the room. It was something she hadn't felt in years, the comfort of being surrounded by people who expected nothing from her. She looked down at the sheep slippers on her feet and allowed herself the briefest moment of contentment. As the night wound down, plates were cleared, and Ethan, now drowsy, leaned his head on Sam's arm. Lily helped Maggie wash the dishes, the clatter of plates mingling with the faint hum of the radio. Isabella felt the urge to offer assistance, an unfamiliar impulse for someone who was accustomed to being served. She stood up and, without thinking, reached for a stack of plates. Maggie looked over, a glimmer of surprise followed by approval in her eyes. "Thank you, Isabella," Maggie said softly, and the words felt heavier than they should, filling a space that had long been empty. The morning sun streamed through the curtains, casting soft, golden light across the guest room where Isabella had slept. She awoke to the smell of fresh coffee and something sweet baking in the kitchen. The sounds of light chatter and clinking dishes floated down the hallway, and for a moment, she lay there, trying to remember the last time she'd woken up to such a feeling of peace. Pushing the thought aside, she slipped on the borrowed slippers and made her way to the kitchen. Maggie stood at the counter, her hair loosely pinned up, a light dusting of flour on her cheek. She looked up with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Morning, Isabella. I hope you slept well," she said, placing a tray of cinnamon rolls into the oven. "Yes, thank you," Isabella replied, the words feeling less practiced than usual. Maggie nodded, her hands busy shaping dough for what looked like biscuits. "I could use an extra set of hands if you're up for it." "Nothing fancy, just stirring this batter." She gestured to a bowl next to the flour bin. Isabella's instinct was to demur, but something in Maggie's casual request made her pause. "Sure," she said, moving toward the counter. Picking up the wooden spoon, she started to mix, the resistance of the thick batter unfamiliar in her manicured hands. A few strokes in, flour puffed up, coating the air and landing squarely on her cashmere sweater. Maggie chuckled, and even Sam, who had just walked in, raised an amused eyebrow. "You're wearing your battle scars already, I see," he teased, grabbing a mug of coffee. Isabella couldn't help but smile, a genuine laugh slipping out despite herself. "Clearly, I'm not cut out for the kitchen," she admitted, trying to brush off the flour with little success. "You're learning," Maggie said, her tone reassuring. "Took me years to make biscuits without turning them into hockey pucks." The kitchen buzzed with activity as Maggie guided Isabella through simple tasks, from folding napkins to measuring out ingredients. Each small job had its pitfalls. The napkins looked more like crumpled tissues than tidy fans, and she accidentally added salt instead of sugar to the mix. But Maggie just laughed, shrugging it off as part of the experience. Throughout the day, preparations for the community Thanksgiving event began to take shape. Sam disappeared to the community center, loaded with supplies, while Maggie and Lily organized a box of homemade crafts for table decorations. Isabella watched the seamless way the family moved, each step brimming with purpose. She wasn't sure why, but the sight made her chest tighten with something unnameable. Outside, the crisp air and the crunch of leaves called out, so when Maggie mentioned needing a hand taking baked goods over to the town hall, Isabella volunteered. The small town streets felt alive, neighbors waving as they walked past. It was far removed from the sterile smiles she was used to back in Manhattan, where even the simplest greeting felt like a negotiation. Here, people seemed to know one another's names, their stories. At the community hall, tables were being covered in cloths, the air filled with the scents of warm cider and spices. Isabella helped place centerpieces, each made from pine cones and twine, a far cry from the towering floral arrangements she was accustomed to but more beautiful in their sincerity. She listened as townspeople exchanged news about their week, laughter punctuating their conversations. She even caught Sam helping an elderly couple set up a folding table, his expression soft and patient. Maggie walked over with 2 cups of cider, passing one to Isabella. "You're doing great," she said. "I know this is probably a lot different from what you're used to." "It is," Isabella admitted, her gaze drifting to a group of children playing tag near the stage. "But it's nice." The words were simple, but the look Maggie gave her suggested she understood the weight behind them. That evening, the family sat on the front porch, wrapped in sweaters as they watched the sky fade from burnt orange to deep blue. Sam and Maggie began sharing stories, snippets of their life before Hopewell, their struggles to keep the mechanic shop afloat, and the sacrifices they'd made. There was no bitterness in their voices, just a quiet pride. They spoke of setbacks, months when bills were tight, days when they doubted their choices, but always ended their tales with a shared look that spoke volumes about resilience. Isabella found herself captivated by their honesty, a rawness that didn't need embellishment. "How did you keep going?" she asked, not realizing until the words were out that she was genuinely curious. Maggie exchanged a glance with Sam. "When you have people who count on you, you find a way," she said softly. And it helps to remember that even in the hard moments, there's always something good waiting on the other side. Isabella fell silent, the warmth of the cider in her hands mirrored by a new warmth in her chest. Back in the city, achievements were marked by bonuses, applause, and accolades that vanished as quickly as they arrived. Here, triumph seemed simpler, more lasting, a roof that didn't leak, a family meal shared without worry. Lily appeared with a blanket, wrapping it around her mom's shoulders and sitting down next to Isabella. "You know, this is my favorite time of year," Lily said, her voice full of that innocent certainty only teenagers seem to have. "It feels like everyone comes together, even if things aren't perfect." Isabella nodded slowly, her eyes drifting to the glow of the porch light and the distant laughter of neighbors a few houses down. For the first time in a long while, perfection felt overrated. The idea that imperfection could be cherished, even celebrated, was beginning to make sense to her. The morning air was crisp as Isabella followed Maggie and Lily down the path to the town hall, arms laden with baskets of pies and fresh bread. The chatter of nearby families and the occasional call of a child playing in the street added to the hum of anticipation that vibrated through the town. Hopewell's main square, with its small shops decorated in autumn wreaths and twinkling lights, felt alive with a quiet, warm energy. The hall stood at the center, its old wooden doors wide open to welcome anyone willing to lend a hand. Inside, the space was already bustling with activity. Tables were set up in neat rows, each one ready to be laden with dishes, brought by local families. A few people waved at Maggie, and she responded with her usual cheerful greeting. Isabella noticed how every nod or smile seemed genuine, free from the layers of polite obligation she'd grown so used to back in Manhattan. "Hey, Maggie. You brought extra hands, I see," called a tall man with a mop of curly hair. He wore an apron that read "Kiss the Cook," which looked comically out of place over his flannel shirt. "This is Isabella," Maggie said, giving Isabella a quick side glance as if checking for hesitation. "She's been helping us out while her car's getting fixed." "Welcome to our chaos," he said, extending a flour-dusted hand. "I'm Ben, the self-proclaimed head chef around here, which just means I burn fewer rolls than most." Isabella shook his hand, his easy grin making her laugh in a way that caught her off guard. As the preparations ramped up, Isabella found herself folding tablecloths and arranging centerpieces of fall leaves and small pumpkins. At first, she stayed close to Maggie, taking quiet cues on what to do. But as the morning wore on, she began to notice small inefficiencies, a table left without cutlery, decorations that could use rearranging to create a more inviting atmosphere. She stepped in, making adjustments, offering tips on flow, and shifting chairs to make space for the expected crowd. Maggie watched her with raised eyebrows. "You've done this before, haven't you?" she asked, a smile forming as Isabella straightened a line of paper lanterns. "I might have planned an event or two," Isabella admitted, half smiling as she thought back to the glittering galas that had once been her domain. Here, though, it felt different. There were no photographers waiting for the perfect shot, no high-stakes deals quietly being brokered in corners. This was simply about people coming together, and for the first time in years, Isabella felt the weight of expectations lift, replaced by something lighter. The townspeople began to take notice. Mrs. Klein, the owner of the local bakery, approached with a dish of sweet rolls balanced precariously in her hands. "You've got an eye for detail, don't you, dear?" she said, nodding approvingly as Isabella stepped in to help her find a spot on the crowded serving table. "Just trying to help," Isabella said, unable to hide the small flush of pride that crept into her cheeks. "Well, we need more helpers like you," Mrs. Klein said, patting her on the arm. "Otherwise, Ben's going to rearrange everything just to confuse us." Laughter erupted nearby as Ben shouted, "I heard that," from across the room. As the hours passed, Isabella found herself trading stories with the volunteers. An older man named Tom recounted tales of past potlucks, including one year when someone's turkey had caught fire, filling the hall with smoke but ending in a burst of laughter as everyone piled outside to eat whatever was salvageable. "You should have seen it, Isabella." "The fire chief ended up carving a turkey with a grin," he said, eyes crinkling as he laughed. Isabella joined in, the sound feeling unfamiliar but welcome. She drifted to where Sam was fixing a string of lights along the stage, one end of the wire dangling stubbornly just out of reach. "Need a hand?" she called out, surprising even herself with the offer. Sam looked back, a hint of surprise in his smile. "Wouldn't say no to that." He handed her the strand, and together they worked, their movements easy and unhurried. They finished stringing the lights and stepped back to admire their work. The hall glowed with a soft, warm light that mirrored the camaraderie in the air. Lily darted by, arms full of paper cutouts. "Hey, Isabella. Want to help with these?" Without waiting for an answer, she handed over half the stack and pointed to a table where kids were busy sticking the cutouts to posters. Isabella sat down, surrounded by chatter and sticky glue, listening as Lily explained the tradition of creating gratitude posters for the event. Each child wrote or drew what they were thankful for, sticking their creations to a large board that would be displayed later. She glanced down at the blank sheet in front of her, pausing before scribbling a simple note, thankful for new experiences. It felt raw, unpolished, but honest. By the time the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the hall, the space had transformed. Tables brimmed with steaming dishes, the stage was set for speeches, and the air was thick with the scent of baked apples and herbs. Isabella stood near the window, taking it all in, when Ben sidled up next to her, 2 cups of cider in hand. "Here, you've earned this," he said, passing one to her. "I don't know what we would have done without you today." She took the cup, warmth spreading through her fingers. "I think you'd have managed just fine," she said, though the compliment made her smile. "Maybe. But it wouldn't have looked half as nice." He clinked his cup against hers before turning to call out another joke to Tom, leaving Isabella with a warmth that had little to do with the cider. The evening wind rustled the leaves outside as the last few guests left the town hall, their laughter and goodbyes fading into the cool night. Inside, Isabella lingered, helping Maggie stack chairs and fold tablecloths. The hum of the day still buzzed around her, but now the room stood quiet, remnants of the celebration scattered across the tables, a forgotten scarf, a lone cup left on its side. Sam appeared from the back of the hall, wiping his hands on a rag. His brow furrowed as he exchanged a look with Maggie, who nodded subtly, her smile thinning. Isabella moved to the window, pretending to adjust a curtain, but the hushed conversation caught her attention. "We'll need to figure out the funding soon," Sam said, his voice low but heavy with concern. "The roof can't wait much longer, and the community center holds more than just Thanksgiving dinners. If we don't fix it, we'll have to close it for the winter events." Maggie's sigh was deep, filled with the kind of resolve that masked worry. "We'll find a way, Sam." "We always do," she said, though the conviction in her voice wavered. Isabella felt a pang of guilt twist in her chest. The Kensington name was synonymous with affluence, yet here was a family, one that had taken her in without question, facing a problem that she could solve with a single phone call. The disparity gnawed at her, making her heart pound with an unexpected sense of shame. As the last chair was stacked, the hall emptied. The town's quiet streets were bathed in moonlight as they walked home. Maggie and Sam moved ahead, talking softly, while Isabella trailed behind with Lily. The air between them was comfortable, filled with the shared silence of a day well spent. But as they turned onto their street, Lily spoke up. "Thanks for helping today, Isabella," she said, her voice light and sincere. It meant a lot to everyone. Isabella glanced at Lily, noting the girl's hopeful eyes, and how they lit up even when she was tired. "I enjoyed it," Isabella said, and she meant it. There was no pretense in her words, no need to prove anything. Lily shifted her gaze to the stars, her face thoughtful. "I can't wait for the day I can help out like that all the time." "I've been saving up for college," she said, almost to herself. "I want to study teaching, but scholarships don't cover everything." Isabella felt a tug of familiarity at Lily's ambition. She saw herself at that age, driven, optimistic, trying to carve out a place in the world. But while Isabella's path had been paved with opportunities handed to her, Lily's was one she would have to fight for. The girl's words resonated, stirring an unfamiliar mix of admiration and sadness. "Teaching is a wonderful choice," Isabella said, her voice softening. "It sounds like you've thought about this a lot." Lily nodded, her ponytail swaying. "Yeah, I want to come back here one day and start programs at the community center, reading groups, tutoring. This place has given me so much, I just want to give back." They reached the house, the warm light spilling out from the living room window welcoming them back. Sam and Maggie were already inside, Ethan curled up on the couch, fast asleep. Isabella paused on the porch, taking a moment to breathe in the cool air. The weight of what she'd heard in the hall pressed on her, and she realized how starkly different her life had been. In Manhattan, wealth meant stock portfolios and exclusive events. Here, a roof over a community center was a lifeline. That night, long after the house had fallen silent, Isabella sat in the guest room with her thoughts spinning. Memories surfaced unbidden, the year her father had surprised her with an all-expenses-paid trip to Europe after she mentioned wanting to see the Louvre, the custom-made dresses she barely remembered wearing. Gratitude had been assumed, never examined, wrapped in the fabric of her gilded life. But here, gratitude meant worn-out shoes and hand-me-downs, people pooling their efforts just to keep the town's heart beating. Isabella turned to look at her phone, which sat face down on the nightstand. The power she wielded with it felt almost absurd now. She could change everything with a single text or call. But doing so felt complicated, a mix of guilt and the fear of being perceived as patronizing. Would Maggie and Sam accept help from a guest who hadn't yet earned their trust? As dawn light filtered through the window, Isabella made a silent promise to herself. She wouldn't act out of guilt or pity. If she helped, it would be with the same sincerity that Maggie and Sam had shown her. It would be for the girl with dreams as bright as city lights, and the couple who believed in her so fiercely. Later that morning, while Maggie prepared breakfast and Sam sipped his coffee, Isabella caught Lily reading a book at the table. The young girl glanced up and smiled, and in that moment, Isabella knew she'd make good on her promise. Thanksgiving Day in Hopewell was bright and brisk, with the sun casting golden patches across the town square. The community hall buzzed with life, filled with the scents of roasting turkey, cinnamon, and warm cider. Isabella walked in with Maggie and Sam, taking in the scene that had been carefully pieced together by so many hands. Tables were lined with cloths adorned with paper leaves, each one decorated by children who giggled nearby as they raced around with sticky fingers. "Hey, Isabella," called Ben, already elbow-deep in a pot of mashed potatoes. He gave her a nod and a grin. "Looks like we're ready for the big feast." She smiled, feeling a rush of something close to pride. In the few days she'd been there, the town had come to feel less like a pit stop and more like a place she belonged, if only temporarily. Isabella made her way to a table where Lily and a few of her friends were arranging plates. The teenagers chattered and laughed, their joy infectious. "Need help?" Isabella offered, picking up a stack of cups before Lily could reply. "Sure. We're setting the kids' table," Lily said, her eyes lighting up. Isabella followed her lead, placing each cup and napkin with care as more families streamed in. The hall filled quickly, the volume of conversation growing louder with each wave of new arrivals. Little ones bounced in their seats, while parents greeted each other with warm hugs and stories of the past year. The afternoon unfolded in a dance of serving dishes, warm smiles, and shared laughter. Isabella moved through the crowd with ease, serving heaping plates of stuffing and pie slices. At one point, Ethan tugged at her sleeve, pointing to a group of children who needed help with their cider. She laughed, kneeling to pour drinks, and found herself surrounded by a chorus of "thank you, that made her heart swell. Nearby, Maggie was chatting with Mrs. Klein, and Sam was deep in conversation with Tom and a few other locals. The entire room hummed with a sense of connection that Isabella hadn't experienced in years. The clinking of silverware, the laughter, the snippets of shared stories, it was a symphony that needed no conductor. As plates were cleared and dessert was set out, Sam made his way to the front of the room, raising a hand for quiet. The room fell still, eyes turning to him with affection. He cleared his throat, the corners of his mouth twitching as he suppressed a smile. "Today is more than just about the food," he began, his voice strong but warm. "It's about gathering as a community, remembering that we are more than just neighbors, we're a family. This year has had its challenges, as it always does, but we are here. Together." His eyes swept the room, pausing for a moment on Isabella. "And sometimes, the most unexpected guests remind us of what we truly have." The crowd erupted into a mix of applause and cheers, and Isabella felt her throat tighten with emotion. She wasn't used to being noticed in such a genuine way, not for what she had or what she could do, but simply for being present. She clapped along, trying to steady the flutter in her chest. As the celebration moved into the evening, Isabella found a quiet corner and pulled out her phone. The festive noise around her became a gentle background as she typed a message to her financial manager. The donation needed to be anonymous, it had to come without strings or expectations. She specified that the funds were for the community center repairs and future programs, including scholarships for students like Lily. With a final tap, the message was sent. She slipped her phone back into her pocket, a subtle smile playing at her lips as she watched Lily engage in a playful argument over the last piece of pumpkin pie. The act of giving felt different this time, not an obligation, not an exchange, but a gesture born out of genuine affection for a place that had opened its doors to her. "Isabella!" Maggie called, weaving through the crowd with a plate of pie in each hand. "You haven't had dessert yet, have you?" "No, I haven't," Isabella said, taking one of the plates with a grin. The two women stood side by side, taking in the busy, joyful room. "This is incredible, Maggie. Everything came together beautifully." Maggie nodded, eyes misting slightly as she looked out at the crowd. "It always does. People like Sam, Ben, even Mrs. Klein, they're the heart of this town. They remind us that no matter how tough things get, we'll find a way through it." A lump formed in Isabella's throat, and she swallowed hard, nodding in agreement. For so long, her world had revolved around wealth as a measure of success, influence as a currency. But standing here, surrounded by laughter and homemade pie, she realized that the richest moments weren't bought or arranged. They were lived, shared, and cherished. Ethan ran by, a streak of energy in the crowd, and Maggie caught his arm just long enough to whisper a reminder to slow down. Isabella chuckled, feeling the warmth of the room settle around her like a comforting blanket. The night rolled on, music playing softly as the town's celebration reached a happy, mellow hum. Isabella felt a shift inside her, subtle but profound. This Thanksgiving had shown her something invaluable, that gratitude wasn't just a word on a holiday card. It was the small, shared moments, the way people rallied around each other, and the feeling of belonging that had nothing to do with wealth or status. The morning after Thanksgiving, the town seemed quieter, the previous day's festivities lingering in the form of laughter echoing from front porches and contented greetings exchanged on the streets. Isabella stood on the porch of Sam and Maggie's house, cradling a warm cup of coffee. The crisp air nipped at her cheeks, and she listened to the rustle of leaves as a light breeze drifted by. It felt bittersweet, knowing her time in Hopewell was coming to an end. Inside, the sounds of clattering dishes and soft conversation pulled her back into the moment. Sam appeared in the doorway, eyes bright but holding a question unspoken. He joined her, leaning against the railing, hands tucked into his flannel pockets. "Morning," he said, giving her a smile that was both familiar and questioning. The kind that suggested he knew something was on her mind. Morning, she replied, taking a sip. The silence between them was comfortable, punctuated by the chatter of birds nearby. A knock at the gate broke their quiet moment. Ben stood there, holding a newspaper with the local headlines in bold letters: "Anonymous Donor Saves Community Center." A few other neighbors had gathered behind him, whispering and nodding. Maggie came to the porch, her expression shifting as she saw the small crowd and Ben's wide-eyed stare. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and hope as he glanced from the paper to Isabella. Isabella's heart thudded in her chest. She set down her mug, taking a deep breath. "Yes, it's true," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. She met Sam's eyes and saw understanding flash there, quickly replaced by something softer. "You?" Maggie whispered, stepping closer, her hands fluttering to her chest. "I couldn't stand by and do nothing," Isabella said, finally letting the truth spill out. "This town, this place, it showed me more about gratitude, resilience, and real wealth than I've ever known." Her eyes swept over the faces now watching her, a mix of surprise and warmth reflected back at her. Sam nodded, a slow, thoughtful movement, and a smile touched his lips. "I don't think we can ever thank you enough," he said, voice thick with sincerity. Maggie took Isabella's hand, squeezing it with a strength that spoke volumes. "You've done more than you know," she said, eyes glistening. "But it's not just about what you gave, it's about who you are and who you've become here." Isabella felt a lump form in her throat. "I didn't expect to find this, any of this," she admitted. "I came here to escape, to find some quiet, and I ended up finding what I didn't even know I needed." Her gaze met Lily's as the teenager came out onto the porch, curiosity and pride in her eyes. "Does that mean you're coming back?" Ethan's voice piped up from behind the group, clutching his toy truck with wide-eyed innocence. Isabella laughed softly, wiping a tear before it fell. "Yes, it does. And more than that, I'm planning to set up a scholarship fund," she said, glancing at Lily. "For students like you, so you can reach your dreams without having to worry so much." Lily's eyes widened, and then she rushed forward, wrapping Isabella in an unexpected hug. "Thank you," she whispered, and the sincerity in her voice made Isabella's chest tighten with an unfamiliar mix of pride and humility. The crowd gradually dispersed, each person stopping to offer words of gratitude or simply a smile. The energy shifted to something light, unburdened, as if Hopewell itself was exhaling in relief. Later, as the morning wore on, Isabella found herself helping Maggie in the kitchen one last time. The quiet rhythm of chopping vegetables and wiping counters felt almost ritualistic, a goodbye wrapped in everyday moments. "I wish I could explain how much this meant to me," Isabella said, pausing as the sound of children playing outside filtered in through the open window. "You opened your home to a stranger, and now I feel like I'm leaving family." Maggie placed a hand on Isabella's shoulder. "You are family now, whether you like it or not," she said with a warm chuckle. "And this isn't goodbye. It's just see you later." Isabella smiled, the corners of her mouth trembling just a bit. "I hope so," she whispered, the weight of her words grounding her. When it was time to go, Sam helped her load her suitcase into the trunk of her now-fixed car. Ethan tugged on her sleeve one last time, and she bent down to his level. "I'll be back before you know it," she said, ruffling his hair as he beamed at her. "Promise?" he asked, eyes wide with trust. "Promise," Isabella said, sealing it with a nod. Sam extended a hand, but when she reached for it, he pulled her into a hug instead. "Take care of yourself, Isabella. And don't be a stranger," he said quietly. "I won't," she replied, her voice firm. As she drove away, the town of Hopewell grew smaller in the rearview mirror, but the feeling it had stirred in her stayed, filling her with a contentment she hadn't known she was missing. She glanced at the dashboard, where a photo of Sam's family that Maggie had tucked into her bag sat propped up, a reminder that wealth wasn't in the things she could buy, but in the people and moments that brought life its deepest meaning. Isabella's car hummed steadily as she turned onto the main road, leaving Hopewell behind in the rearview mirror. She took one last look at the little town nestled in its quilt of trees and rooftops, the warmth of its people still clinging to her like a soft scarf. Her heart felt both heavy and light, a mix of sadness at leaving and the newfound joy that filled her from the inside out. The road stretched ahead, a ribbon of possibilities flanked by tall oaks and the bright scatter of fallen leaves. This time, driving alone felt less like a flight from something and more like a journey towards something better. As the landscape rolled by, familiar landmarks took on new meaning. The rickety bridge that once looked rickety now seemed quaint, a connection between one life and another. The small gas station with its faded sign was no longer just a forgotten pit stop, but a marker of where her world had begun to shift. Even the mountain peaks in the distance, brushed with the first dustings of snow, felt like guardians watching over the road home. Isabella's thoughts turned inward, replaying snippets of laughter, shared meals, and the comfort of Maggie's kitchen. The contrast between her Manhattan life and her days in Hopewell felt stark but necessary. In the city, success had been measured by boardroom nods and Instagram-worthy moments. Here, she'd discovered it in stories shared over cider and the small, unvarnished moments of connection. As the skyline of New York City came into view, sharp and glistening against the afternoon sky, Isabella felt a new resolve settle within her. The buildings that once symbolized her ambition now seemed to hold space for something richer, a chance to share what she'd found. A plan unfurled in her mind, quickening her pulse with the excitement of giving rather than taking. In the days that followed, she set her vision in motion. Isabella's phone buzzed with curiosity from her usual crowd, invitations to Thanksgiving dinners held in penthouse suites and exclusive venues. She declined them all, much to the confusion of her social circle. Instead, she reached out to shelters and community centers, arranging for a meal that would bring warmth to those who rarely found it. Calls were made, logistics planned, and her penthouse transformed into something wholly different. On Thanksgiving Day, the dining room that usually gleamed with polished crystal and silver was now filled with folding tables covered in cheerful autumn tablecloths. Volunteers bustled about, placing trays of roasted vegetables, turkeys, and pies along the tables. The scent of cinnamon and rosemary floated through the air, blending with the quiet murmur of anticipation. Isabella, wearing a simple sweater and jeans, greeted the first families with a smile that reached her eyes. Children shuffled in with wide eyes, and parents exchanged glances, clearly not accustomed to such an invitation. The space filled with conversation and laughter, much like Hopewell's hall had, each voice adding to the mosaic of joy. As she served slices of pie and filled glasses with cider, Isabella felt the room grow warmer, more alive. A young boy at the end of the table tugged on her sleeve. "Is this your house?" he asked, his gaze drifting to the view of the city below, lights starting to twinkle as dusk settled in. "It is," she said, kneeling to his level. "But today, it's everyone's home." The boy's eyes lit up, and he smiled shyly, before reaching for his spoon. Isabella stood and let her gaze drift over the room, filled with faces alight with gratitude and relief. For the first time, her home felt like it truly belonged to her, not just for its luxury but for what it now represented. As the evening wound down, the last guests trickled out, their thanks echoing long after the door had closed. Isabella leaned against the window, looking out at the skyline, which seemed less daunting now, more welcoming. The city felt different, infused with a warmth she hadn't noticed before. She turned her head and saw a framed picture of Sam's family on the mantel, placed there deliberately, a grounding reminder of what truly mattered. The reflection in the glass caught her eye, a woman who had walked into a small town searching for solitude but found connection instead. A woman who, in giving, had discovered her truest self. Isabella's smile was soft, eyes glistening with the satisfaction that comes from love freely given and moments fully lived. Outside, the city continued its endless pulse, unaware that something profound had shifted within one of its brightest lights. And in that stillness, Isabella stood, no longer just the heiress with a name but a woman with a story, one that began with a broken car and led to a heart mended in the most unexpected way. And for the first time in years, as she watched the lights below flicker like stars, she felt truly home.